honestly, he's so great. I just want to protect him, and he gives me all the emotions. So recently, as a result of the ongoing pandemic, I dived into some shows I hadn't seen, and I want to talk about one of them today because it was frankly quite brilliant, and I'm not over it to the point that I'm literally watching it again, only this time with my boyfriend, which has been amusing, to say the least. The show that I'm talking about right now is Signal, or I believe in the Hangul translates to Shigunol. If I just mispronounced that, I'm terribly sorry. This is a, as you've guessed it, South Korean crime drama that was made in 2015, 2016, and is essentially a cop show that involves a time paradox. Yes. So we're doing cop drama plus not really time travel, but sort of time travel. The basic, for lack of a better word, conceit of this show is that there is a walkie-talkie that allows a particular individual in the present day, a character called Park Hae-young, to speak with a detective who is in the past, whose name is Lee Jae-han. And let me tell you, Lee Jae-han, I love this character. I love him so much. I like Park Hae-young, and I like a lot of the other side characters, but Lee Jae-han. It doesn't hurt that he's being portrayed by Choi Jin-young, who is an actor, a South Korean actor I really love. If you haven't seen the film that was made in, actually I want to say it was 2016, called The Handmaiden by the same director as Old Boy and Stoker and plenty of other brilliant films. He's so good in that film. He is a complete 180 from the character that he plays in this show, and it for me really just shows how really strong he is as an actor. And something I found interesting was actually commentary, because I fell down the wicca hole of looking up the show and the other actors. A lot of commentary I saw about this show, which was critically acclaimed in Korea, did extremely well, and I can understand why. A lot of commentary was made about how Cho Jin-woong isn't the typical Korean drama boy aesthetic. I guess they were basically saying he's not pretty. He has a face that's not the typical. And I suppose I can understand that. I've kind of discovered a certain aesthetic that seems to be strived for with a lot of the male stars of Korean dramas, and the same goes for the female stars. I mean, every country has different beauty standards. But for me, that doesn't matter, and I've also noticed that I apparently seem to gravitate towards the unusual faces in Korean media. Something I've gathered. I actually think his face is very emotive, very expressive. I look at it and go, no, dude, you are very handsome. Let's be real. But what I like most about this show isn't just the actors. The actors are phenomenal and they do help make the show. It's actually how well it's plotted, because you're dealing with a time paradox. Time paradoxes and time travel, I think, is always a really tricky thing to try and do in media and in storytelling, because it's do you explain the time travel or don't you? If you explain it, it has to be plausible enough that we're gonna roll with it. If you don't explain it, everything else needs to be so good that I'm gonna just roll with it. In the case of Signal, none of it is necessarily explained. Like I said, Park Hae-young and Lee Jae-han communicate through this walkie-talkie. A walkie-talkie that essentially doesn't work in any other respect. Is broken. Doesn't even have batteries by the time Park Hae-young is looking at it. Are you whistling? Nah. And yet this walkie-talkie, not every day, but fairly frequently, will always turn on at 11:23 p.m. That time is later made significant. We understand why it turns on at that time. What we never really understand is why it turns on when it does. By the end, you realize there's ultimately, throughout most of this, kind of a grand conspiracy that needs to be unraveled, and you understand how Park Hae-young and Lee Jae-han are connected, but you also have to question, would they be connected without the time paradox that clearly was sort of already existing? Or was it? There's a lot of questions, and the show doesn't really bother to dive into the science fiction element of it all, which I think is to the show's benefit. Because if we'd got bogged down in like, how does this walkie-talkie work? Why is it only talking to us? Blah, blah, blah. We'd have ground the plot to a stuttering halt, and it would really be to the show's detriment. There are several moments where Park Hae-young and Lee Jae-han at least mention that, like, we don't understand why this is happening, and there's more than one occasion where they question why it's happening and why it had to be them. And those are usually moments where the actions that have been taken have actually caused butterfly effect consequences. So anything that Park Hae-young does to help Lee Jae-han in the past ripples forward into the future, changes even the past at times. There are people who die who didn't originally die as a result of the changes they make in solving these crimes that are, in 2015, cold cases. Another thing that's really interesting, at least for me, about this show is the culture around cold cases and like the statute of limitations. For anyone who doesn't know, a statute of limitations is essentially the idea that after a period of time, you can no longer be charged with a particular crime if it remains unsolved. All of the laws on statute of limitations differ from country to country. There are some where, in general, there isn't a statute of limitations. Some crimes, I mean, like I know in the US, I think things like murder doesn't have a statute of limitations, but say like rape and others might have a statute of limitations. I think it's like 5 years is the statute of limitations on things like sexual crimes. And one of the big things in this show, we open up with the idea that they're trying to solve an old kidnapping case whose statute of limitations is going to be running up. We literally come down to the wire on it. And it, in the public consciousness of this show, creates the idea of like, should we get rid of the statute of limitations? Because we found the killer, but because we didn't get the exact DNA results until like 3 minutes past the deadline, we can't even charge her with the murder, which seems pretty fucked up. I can agree with that. How does that make you not guilty of the crime? And so the whole then plot of the show is that the statute of limitations for things like murder, kidnapping, and arson, I believe, like those major violent crimes, is thrown out the window. So there's a cold case team that's brought in to investigate these unsolved cases. And the attitude towards the cold case team is extremely hostile. Like, extremely hostile, which was something I did not realize. Because it's one of those things where in the West, we have cold cases. There are some really famous cold cases. The Zodiac Killer, the Black Dahlia, Jack the Ripper. Like, cold cases abound. There's tons of them. I mean, you've BuzzFeed Unsolved on YouTube going through a whole bunch of cold cases. They're all over the place. And it's one of those things where from what I gather in the West, it is not, there's less hostility investigating a cold case. Like, there's a lot of kind of, in many ways, sort of defeatist attitude, very, like, it's a futile effort. Like, if they couldn't solve it, you likely won't, but you won't really find hostility, and certainly not to the degree that is experienced in Signal. It is seen almost as, like, a betrayal to investigate these cold cases, even worse, to solve it, because you essentially imply that the original investigative team didn't do their job and didn't do it well. And again, it's seen like a betrayal. And I found that so interesting because that's a dynamic I'm not familiar with. But they come up against it again and again and again. This sort of like, we did our jobs. Like, why are you investigating this? I mean, granted, it becomes clear in the show that there is a hell of a lot of police corruption, and there are things that happen that made me extremely angry. But that attitude towards the cold cases was so interesting, or reinvestigating something where it's like they already, in some cases, they caught the culprit, but they caught the wrong culprit. And it's like, what do you mean they got it wrong? Like, how dare you question them? And I do think it's a cultural thing that obviously I can't speak to. I am not South Korean. I don't live in South Korea. I'm taking it as kind of a representation of the cultural zeitgeist over there and being like, oh, really? Is that how this is seen? Certainly makes for really good drama. I'll give them that. And what leads also into that hostility, that hostility also becomes even more frustrating when we watch it, and we're obviously seeing certain characters who we know are corrupt and are feeding into a corrupt system go after characters like Lee Jae-han and Park Hae-young, who are actually really good, upstanding, moral characters trying to solve crimes. Lee Jae-han has an amazing moment where he also goes like, if somebody has committed a crime, no matter who they are, no matter how rich, no matter how powerful they are, they should face the consequences of it. And you're just like, yes, my son, speak to me. But that's also an attitude that's going to get him in a lot of trouble because obviously, again, we're dealing with a conspiracy that involves police corruption, so he gets on the wrong side of everyone. Though I will say the beautiful way in which Park Hae-young and Lee Jae-hyun's stories intertwines eventually, like, it is so heartbreakingly good. I was so impressed not only with the storytelling and how well interwoven it was, but then also like the emotion that was brought to it. Like, I was describing the show to people, I was like, this is a show that's gonna hurt you and then you're gonna thank it for it. Like, you will say thank you because it hurt you, because it's like that good kind of hurt where you're crying because you should be. You don't feel manipulated in, like, when you start crying, you're just like, this is so good. I can't not cry in this moment. Signal is available to stream in the United States, at least on Netflix. I don't know about the rest of the world. I really hope it is available in the rest of the world to stream on Netflix. I highly recommend it. It is 16 episodes. I will say that, like a lot of Korean dramas, as I've realized, these episodes are anywhere from like 60 to 90 minutes long, but it's so worth the ride. It gives you an interesting view into the culture of cold cases and statutes of limitations, but also it creates this really beautiful human drama. The only part I'm annoyed at is it teased a second season and everything's been put on hold because of coronavirus. So, as far as I know, I believe I read that it was written and they were due to start shooting this year, but obviously everything got put on hold. And I'm so sad because I want another season of this show. Like, I just want more of Signal. I need another season of it. Thanks for watching me ramble today. If you'd like to see more from me, go ahead and click that button with my face on it. It'll take you to my channel where I ramble about a whole lot of different things. Got some thoughts of your own? Go ahead and leave them down in the comments. And make sure that if you want to see more ramblings from me, you click that little subscribe button. That's it for me today, you guys, so until next time, cheers.